Do not fire. Do not touch them. If anyone treats them like monsters before we know what they are, then we become the monsters first. Those were the last words broadcast across the Galactic Emergency Network before Station Epsilon 9 vanished from every scanner in the known universe. No explosion lit up the darkness. No distress call filled the channels. 1 second it was there, home to nearly 2 million civilians, scientists, and diplomats. The next, every signal simply stopped. Across the galaxy, governments froze. Trading routes closed. Military fleets abandoned patrols and raced toward defensive positions that everyone secretly knew would never be enough. Every history book carried the same warning about the machine swarm. Every child grew up hearing the same bedtime horror story. If the swarm appeared, worlds disappeared. Nobody fought. Nobody negotiated. They only ran. The Galactic Defense Council assembled within 23 minutes, faster than it had for any war in recorded history. Representatives from dozens of civilizations filled the enormous chamber, their voices layered with panic despite every attempt to remain professional. Holographic projections rotated above the room, displaying the final images recovered from Station Epsilon 9. Tiny silver machines flowed across corridors in perfect silence, covering walls, ceilings, and maintenance shafts like living liquid metal. Admiral Kaler stood before the chamber with tired eyes and squared shoulders. He had spent 30 years studying the swarm, and today was the first time he looked genuinely afraid. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said quietly, "everything we feared has begun again." No one interrupted him. They had all expected this day eventually. They had simply hoped it would come after their own lifetime. Several delegates lowered their heads. Others quietly contacted their families through secure channels, unsure whether there would be another chance. Earth's delegation sat together near the rear of the chamber. Ambassador Emma Collins watched the growing chaos while reading every report she could find on her tablet. Beside her, Daniel Brooks seemed strangely distracted. Instead of staring at the terrifying footage like everyone else, he was crouched beside a small circular cleaning robot that had wandered into the hallway outside the conference room. The little machine bumped gently against the wall before turning itself around with a soft electronic beep. Daniel flipped it over, removed a strand of hair wrapped around one of its wheels, snapped the cover back into place, and set it on the floor again. The robot happily rolled away. Emma blinked. "Daniel," she whispered, trying not to sound irritated, "the galaxy may be ending." "Maybe," he answered calmly without looking up. "Or maybe somebody forgot basic maintenance." Emma stared at him. "Did you even hear what Kaler just said?" "Every word." "Then why are you fixing a vacuum?" Daniel shrugged. "Because it asked for help before anyone else did." She opened her mouth to argue but stopped when the main display suddenly zoomed closer to one of the recovered images. Thousands of tiny machines paused together for less than a second before changing formation with almost perfect coordination. Daniel leaned forward. His expression changed for the first time all morning. It was not fear. It was recognition. "Hold on," he murmured. "No way." Emma turned toward him. "What?" Daniel narrowed his eyes at the screen. "Can you rewind that clip about 5 seconds?" The technician controlling the display hesitated until Kaler gave a silent nod. The footage rolled backward, then played again. The silver machines repeated the exact same movement. Daniel folded his arms and let out the smallest laugh. It was not mocking. It sounded more like someone unexpectedly finding an old photograph in the attic. Emma felt a chill crawl down her spine. "Daniel," she asked carefully, "have you seen something like this before?" He never answered her. He kept watching the screen as if an impossible memory had just reached across decades and quietly tapped him on the shoulder. Admiral Kaler let the recording loop 3 more times before the room fell into complete silence. Every delegate was searching for some hidden pattern that might explain what they were seeing, but only one person looked almost disappointed instead of frightened. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck and quietly said, "That movement is not random." Every eye in the chamber turned toward him. Kaler narrowed his gaze. "You recognize their behavior?" Daniel hesitated for a moment. "I recognize the logic." A ripple of uneasy whispers spread through the council. One of the senior delegates leaned forward. "Impossible. Our greatest scientists have studied the swarm for centuries." Daniel nodded politely. "I believe that." "Then explain yourself." Daniel looked back at the frozen image floating above the chamber. Thousands of tiny machines had rearranged themselves into neat geometric lines before disappearing into the walls of the station. "They are not searching for people," he said. "They are searching for structure." Nobody answered. Emma crossed her arms. "Daniel, now would be a really good time to stop talking in riddles." He pointed toward the display. "Zoom in on section 14. The technician enlarged a narrow maintenance corridor. The machines had completely ignored expensive laboratory equipment while surrounding an old ventilation unit. Daniel quietly smiled to himself. "There it is." Kaler stepped closer. "What are we looking at?" "Dust." Several delegates exchanged confused looks. "Dust?" Daniel nodded. "Or clogged airflow. Maybe damaged filtration. I cannot tell from this angle." The chamber erupted into frustrated voices. One representative slammed a hand against the table. "Entire civilizations have disappeared, and you are talking about air filters?" Daniel remained calm. "Yes, because they are acting like maintenance systems." Nobody laughed. Kaler certainly did not. "Engineer Brooks," he said carefully, "those machines dismantled 3 military fleets over the last 400 years. Did anyone ever ask what those fleets were doing before they vanished?" Daniel replied. Kaler stopped speaking. Emma noticed it first. Daniel was not arguing. He was genuinely trying to solve a puzzle everyone else had accepted as unsolvable. Before anyone could continue, alarms suddenly echoed through the chamber. A young operations officer rushed inside, breathing hard. "Admiral, we just received a priority update from Frontier Relay 7. Kaler turned immediately. "Report. A civilian supply station located 18 light-years from the last incident has detected the same machine signatures." The holographic map instantly updated. A second blinking red marker appeared. Then a third. Then a fourth. The room grew noticeably quieter as the pattern became impossible to ignore. They were not spreading randomly. They were following something. "How much time?" Kaler asked. "Estimated arrival at Relay 7 is 38 minutes. Emma looked at Daniel. "Tell me you have an idea." Daniel stared at the expanding map without blinking. Maybe. I need better data." Kaler folded his hands behind his back. "You have 5 minutes. I need engineering logs." "Granted." "Maintenance reports." "Granted." "Original construction blueprints." Kaler frowned. "For a rescue operation?" Daniel shook his head. "No," he looked directly at the admiral. "I want to know who built those stations." The room fell silent again. Even Emma had not expected that question. Kaler slowly replied. "Most of them were built by different civilizations." Daniel nodded once. "Then somebody is about to discover they all copied the same design." Before anyone could respond, every light inside the council chamber flickered once. Then twice. The massive holographic display froze in place. Somewhere deep inside the station, emergency power systems quietly came online, and for the first time since the meeting had begun, Daniel's calm expression disappeared. He looked toward the ceiling and whispered, "They are already here." The emergency lights shifted from white to deep amber as the council chamber sealed itself automatically. Heavy security doors locked with a sharp metallic click that echoed through the enormous room. Every delegate looked toward the exits before looking back at Admiral Kaler. Nobody wanted to be the first to admit they were afraid. Emma stepped closer to Daniel. "Please tell me that was just a power fluctuation." Daniel slowly shook his head. "Power systems do not blink like that unless something interrupts the maintenance network." Kaler immediately turned toward the operations staff. "Run a complete diagnostic." A technician worked furiously across 3 holographic displays before his expression changed. "Admiral, I cannot access the station maintenance servers." "System failure?" "No, sir." The technician swallowed. "The servers are responding." "Then what is the problem?" "They are refusing our commands." Quiet panic spread through the chamber. Another officer hurried across the room carrying a portable scanner. "Environmental controls are still functioning. Life support is stable. Internal communications are operating. Nothing appears damaged." Daniel folded his arms. "Exactly." Emma looked at him. "Why does that bother you?" "Because if they wanted to destroy this station, they would have started with life support." Kaler studied Daniel carefully. "Then what are they doing?" Daniel walked toward the giant holographic blueprint still floating above the conference table. He pointed toward a cluster of maintenance tunnels running beneath the council chambers. "Cleaning." Several delegates protested immediately. "Enough of this nonsense. Entire planets disappeared. You expect us to believe they are janitors?" Daniel ignored the complaints. Tell me something. When was the last full infrastructure inspection performed on this station? Nobody answered. Finally, an elderly administrator adjusted his glasses. About 42 standard years ago. Daniel slowly nodded. That is longer than I expected. Emma stared at him. You cannot be serious. I am completely serious. He pointed toward another section of the blueprint. Every modern building has hidden systems. Air circulation, cooling lines, waste processing, autonomous repair access. Most people never think about them because they work in the background. Kaler crossed his arms. Continue. Now imagine those repair systems have been improving themselves for thousands of years without anyone fully understanding their original programming. One of the science advisors interrupted. That theory contradicts every historical record. Daniel smiled politely. Does it contradict the evidence, or only the stories built around the evidence? Before anyone could answer, another alarm sounded. This one was different. The station artificial intelligence spoke calmly through overhead speakers. Attention! Unauthorized maintenance activity detected on levels 14 through 19. Please remain calm. The words maintenance activity echoed through the chamber. Daniel looked almost relieved. That is the first accurate report I have heard all day. Kaler stepped beside him. You expected that announcement? I hoped for it. Explain. Daniel pointed toward the live security feeds appearing across the room. Tiny silver machines moved silently through ventilation shafts. They ignored frightened civilians standing only a few feet away. They ignored security officers holding defensive positions. Instead, they gathered around aging utility conduits, damaged access panels, and neglected service corridors. Emma watched the footage in disbelief. They are passing right by people. Yes, Daniel answered softly. Because people are not their priority. Kaler frowned. Then what happens if someone gets in their way? Daniel did not answer immediately. He continued watching the monitors until one security officer cautiously rolled an abandoned cleaning cart away from a blocked hallway. The machines instantly changed direction and continued moving without hesitation. Daniel let out a slow breath. That confirms it. Emma looked at him. Confirms what? Daniel met her eyes for the first time since the alarms began. Somebody taught the entire galaxy to fear something they never bothered to understand. And if I am right, the next mistake everyone is about to make will be far more dangerous than the machines themselves. The silence inside the council chamber lasted only a few seconds before it shattered. A security commander pointed toward one of the live surveillance screens. Contact on level 16. Security team is moving in. The display switched automatically. 6 officers wearing sealed protective suits advanced through a wide service corridor with portable scanning equipment instead of heavy weapons. Their orders were simple. Find out where the machines were going without interfering. Daniel nodded with quiet approval. That is smarter. Emma glanced at him. You expected them to send soldiers. I expected someone to panic. On the screen, the officers rounded a corner and stopped. Thousands of silver machines flowed across the ceiling in perfect silence. None of them reacted to the humans or the alien officers standing only a few yards away. Instead, the swarm surrounded an aging coolant pipe that had developed microscopic fractures after decades of use. Tiny sparks flickered from an exposed junction box nearby. One officer whispered into his headset, "They are ignoring us." Another slowly reached toward the damaged panel. "Looks like they are repairing it." Before anyone could answer, a nervous guard farther back in the formation made a terrible decision. Believing the machines were about to spread into the occupied section of the station, he activated a high-energy containment pulse without waiting for authorization. The bright flash raced across the hallway. For one brief moment, the machines froze. Then every silver unit in the corridor instantly shifted direction. They did not rush the officers. They did not attack. Instead, they surrounded the damaged electrical conduit that had overloaded during the pulse, sealing the broken section with astonishing speed, while several thousand more disappeared into nearby maintenance shafts. Daniel closed his eyes. There it is. Kaler looked sharply toward him. Explain. The pulse created new damage. They changed priorities. Emma stared at the screen. They cared more about the conduit than the people standing right beside it. Exactly. The security commander looked confused. Then why did every previous fleet disappear after engaging them? Daniel folded his arms. Because fleets are full of engines, reactors, and structural systems. Every shot fired creates more damage. Every damaged system becomes another repair target. The commander frowned. That makes no sense. Daniel answered calmly. Only because you keep assuming their mission is war. Suddenly, another alarm echoed through the station. Warning. Primary coolant pressure stabilizing. Emergency repair activity detected. A technician gasped. The damaged pipe is functioning again. The room fell quiet as updated engineering reports streamed across the holographic displays. Every reading showed the same impossible result. Sections of the station that had needed repairs for years were suddenly operating at peak efficiency. Air circulation improved. Power consumption dropped. Even long-standing sensor faults disappeared one by one. Kaler slowly looked toward Daniel. You are telling me the most feared machines in recorded history just repaired our station? Daniel did not answer immediately. His attention had shifted to another monitor showing the exterior of the council complex. Countless silver lights were emerging from hidden maintenance ports along the outer hull, drifting into open space in organized streams. They were leaving. Emma finally smiled with relief. It is over. Daniel kept watching the display, his expression growing serious again. No, he said quietly. This station just passed an inspection. Emma's smile faded. What does that mean? Daniel pointed toward the expanding star map as new emergency transmissions flooded into the network. It means they were never traveling aimlessly. More warning markers appeared across nearby sectors, forming a nearly perfect line toward the oldest industrial systems in the galaxy. Daniel took a slow breath. Now we need to find out who built the original network they keep trying to maintain before someone decides to stop them the wrong way again. The emergency meeting ended without anyone leaving their seat. No one wanted to admit it, but the story every civilization had repeated for generations no longer fit the evidence in front of them. Admiral Kaler stood silently at the center of the chamber, while engineers projected hundreds of years of historical records across the room. Bright lines connected ancient space stations, mining colonies, orbital shipyards, and abandoned industrial worlds. Daniel walked slowly around the holograms with his hands in his pockets, studying each location without saying a word. Emma finally broke the silence. You have found something. Daniel nodded. Not something. A pattern. Kaler motioned for the displays to enlarge. Show us. Daniel pointed toward the oldest facilities on the map. Every place the machines visited shares one thing. A science advisor leaned closer. Strategic value? No. Military importance? No. Daniel tapped another cluster of stations. Age. The room grew quiet again. These are the oldest pieces of infrastructure still operating in known space. Most of them were built before the Galactic Alliance even existed. Kaler frowned. That cannot be a coincidence. I do not think it is. Another technician interrupted from the communications console. Admiral, we have recovered archived construction files from Frontier Relay 7. Display them. Ancient engineering diagrams filled the room. Their labels had faded with time, and most of the original language had long been forgotten. Daniel stepped closer until he noticed a small symbol printed beside every maintenance access point. His breathing slowed. There it is. Emma looked over his shoulder. What is it? Daniel smiled in disbelief. A universal maintenance icon. Several delegates looked confused. One even laughed nervously. That tiny symbol. Daniel nodded. You still use versions of it today without realizing where it came from. Kaler folded his arms. Explain. Daniel looked around the chamber. Generations copied old engineering standards because they worked. Then the originals were forgotten. The designs survived. The instructions did not. Before anyone could respond, another priority alert interrupted the discussion. A freight convoy had entered one of the marked systems despite repeated warnings. Civilian pilots, unaware of the ongoing crisis, had attempted to pass through an aging industrial corridor. Live footage appeared above the council floor. Hundreds of silver machines surrounded the convoy, not attacking but completely blocking every route forward. The frightened pilots began accelerating, trying to force their way through. Tell them to stop, Daniel said immediately. The communications officer transmitted the warning, but the convoy commander answered with visible frustration. Negative. We are getting out of here. Daniel exhaled slowly. They think they are escaping danger. Seconds later, the lead cargo ship overloaded one of the deteriorating transit gates while attempting an emergency jump. The ancient structure shook violently, warning lights flashing across every support beam. Instantly, the silver machines abandoned the convoy and flooded toward the failing gate. Thousands disappeared inside the damaged framework as stabilization readings climbed back into the safe range. The convoy escaped untouched. Nobody in the council chamber spoke for several long seconds. Emma finally whispered, "They saved them." Daniel kept watching the screen, without caring whether anyone noticed. Kaler looked toward the engineering records once more. "If everything you are saying is true, then someone built these machines with a purpose no civilization remembers." Daniel slowly nodded. "Exactly." He pointed toward one final entry buried deep inside the oldest construction archive. There was no manufacturer listed, no homeworld, no species. Only one line remained readable after thousands of years. Maintenance Protocol, version 1. Authorized service personnel only. Daniel stared at the faded words, and for the first time since arriving at the council, he looked genuinely unsettled. "I know that wording," he said quietly. "I have seen it before." Daniel did not touch the ancient archive at first. He simply stared at the faded line until Emma stepped beside him. "You have definitely seen that before." Daniel nodded slowly. "Not here." "Then where?" He let out a quiet breath. "Back on Earth." The council chamber erupted with questions before Kaler raised one hand for silence. "Engineer Brooks," the admiral said calmly. "Choose your next words carefully." Daniel looked around the room. "About 25 years ago, I worked for a robotics company that specialized in autonomous maintenance systems. We built machines that inspected pipelines, repaired electrical grids, cleaned hazardous facilities, and maintained equipment people could not safely reach." One of the science advisors immediately objected. "Are you suggesting your company created these machines?" Daniel shook his head. "No. I am saying the warning label uses the same engineering language, the same philosophy. Whoever wrote this expected technicians, not soldiers, to read it." Emma frowned. "That cannot be a coincidence." "I agree." Before anyone could continue, every communication console in the chamber lit up at once. A fleet commander appeared on the main display from an industrial sector nearly 200 light-years away. His voice was tense but controlled. "Admiral, we have a developing situation." Kaler turned immediately. "Report." A mining coalition ignored evacuation orders and deployed automated defense satellites around the orbital refineries. Daniel quietly closed his eyes. "Please tell me they did not." The commander hesitated. The satellites identified the incoming machines as hostile and activated automatically. The room fell silent. Live footage filled the enormous display. Hundreds of defense platforms rotated into firing positions while streams of silver machines continued moving toward the aging refinery without changing speed or formation. The first interceptor drones launched from the station, filling space with bright engine trails. Daniel stepped closer to the screen. "Turn them off." Kaylee looked at him. "Those stations are defending themselves." "No," Daniel answered. "They are creating more damage than the machines ever would." Nobody had time to argue. The interceptor drones reached the swarm and detonated their electromagnetic containment charges. For a fraction of a second, thousands of silver machines froze in space. Then something happened that nobody in the council had ever witnessed before. The swarm split apart into dozens of perfectly organized groups. Half continued toward the refinery exactly as before. The others accelerated toward every disabled satellite, every damaged drone, and every fractured support structure created during the interception. Emma stared at the display. "They divided their workload." Daniel nodded. "Exactly. But then the situation changed again. One damaged satellite drifted out of position and collided with a fuel transfer tower. Emergency alarms spread across the refinery. Automatic safety doors sealed entire sections of the complex. Civilian workers became trapped behind emergency bulkheads, while the station's aging computer struggled to coordinate thousands of simultaneous failures. Kaler looked at Daniel. "Now what?" Daniel did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the silver machines. Instead of entering the trapped civilian areas, they completely ignored the distress signals and poured into the refinery's central maintenance core. "They are choosing the infrastructure over the people," Emma whispered. "Because they assume fixing the system saves everyone," Daniel replied. "They do not understand panic." Kaler clenched his jaw. "Then they are dangerous, even if they are not malicious." "Yes," Daniel said quietly. That is the misunderstanding nobody has survived long enough to explain. Suddenly, one technician gasped. Admiral, the machines just accessed the refinery control network. Every display flickered as unfamiliar maintenance commands spread through the station's operating system. Daniel's expression changed instantly. That should not be possible. Emma looked at him. Why? He stared at the scrolling code, his voice barely above a whisper. Because they are using command syntax that has not existed on Earth for decades. Daniel stepped toward the nearest engineering console before anyone could stop him. Streams of unfamiliar maintenance commands continued flowing across the display, each line replacing corrupted control routines with cleaner, more efficient versions. The refinery was not shutting down. It was rebuilding itself while millions of people watched in complete confusion. Emma stood beside him. Can you read it? Daniel nodded slowly. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to know whoever designed this thought exactly like an old Earth systems engineer. Admiral Kaler looked unconvinced. You are saying an unknown civilization used the same engineering principles as humanity? Daniel gave a small shrug. Or humanity unknowingly inherited theirs. The room became silent again. That possibility had never crossed anyone's mind. One of the historians hurried forward carrying newly recovered archive files. Admiral, we found something buried beneath multiple data migrations. Most of these records were considered corrupted centuries ago. Kaler gestured for them to be displayed immediately. Ancient maintenance manuals appeared beside modern engineering standards. At first glance, they looked completely unrelated, but Daniel pointed at the formatting instead of the words. There. Look at the revision numbering. Look at the inspection intervals. Look at the color coding. Emma leaned closer. They are almost identical. Not almost, Daniel replied quietly. They are descendants. Before anyone could ask another question, the refinery commander reappeared on the main screen. This time he was smiling with disbelief. Admiral, every damaged system is coming back online. Reactor efficiency is increasing. Air quality is improving. Even equipment scheduled for replacement next year is operating like new. A science advisor whispered, That is impossible. Daniel shook his head. No, it is expensive. Kaylee looked at him. Explain. Replacing equipment is easy. Maintaining it for thousands of years takes patience. Suddenly, another alert interrupted the celebration. One section of the refinery remained offline. Emergency doors refused to open because the old control software had become incompatible with the newly restored systems. Nearly 200 workers were still trapped inside a secure maintenance sector. Emma looked toward Daniel. Can the machines reach them? Yes. Will they? Daniel hesitated. Only if the repair priority leads them there. Everyone watched the live feed in complete silence. Thousands of silver machines moved through the refinery with perfect coordination, repairing support beams, replacing damaged wiring, cleaning blocked cooling ducts, and restoring environmental controls. Then, without warning, the entire swarm stopped moving. Every single unit froze in place for nearly 3 seconds. The refinery commander frowned. What happened? Daniel stared at the monitor. They received something. From who? Nobody answered because nobody knew. Then every silver machine slowly turned in exactly the same direction. Not toward damaged machinery. Not toward the trapped workers. Toward one maintenance terminal where an engineer had connected an antique diagnostic laptop recovered from an old storage room. Daniel's eyes widened. Zoom in. The camera focused on the dusty computer. Across its faded screen appeared a simple text prompt that no one aboard the refinery had typed. Maintenance credentials detected. Awaiting supervisor authorization. Emma looked back at Daniel. Supervisor? He did not respond immediately. His face had gone completely still. Kaler noticed it first. Engineer Brooks. Daniel swallowed once before answering. That operating prompt. I learned it during my first week as a junior technician back on Earth. The Admiral frowned. You recognize the interface? Daniel nodded. Not just the interface. He looked at the waiting command prompt as though it belonged to an old friend he had not seen in decades. I know exactly what it is asking for. Daniel took a slow breath as every pair of eyes in the council chamber settled on him. Nobody spoke. Even Admiral Kaler waited. The ancient prompt remained frozen on the refinery terminal as if it had all the patience in the universe. Emma finally broke the silence. Daniel, what is it waiting for? He answered almost absent-mindedly. A supervisor acknowledgement. Meaning, back on Earth, autonomous maintenance systems were never supposed to make major infrastructure changes without a human approving the work. It was a safety rule. The machines could recommend repairs. They could begin emergency stabilization. But before permanent modifications, they asked for authorization. One of the council scientists shook his head. "You are telling us the most feared machines in history are waiting for permission?" Daniel looked at him. "That is exactly what I am telling you." The room became so quiet that the faint hum of the holographic projectors suddenly sounded loud. Kaler stepped closer to the display. If they have been waiting all this time, why did entire civilizations disappear? Daniel studied the historical reports still floating across the room. Because every civilization answered the same way. How? By shooting at the maintenance crew. No one laughed. The sentence landed harder than anyone expected. Emma slowly looked back at the refinery feed where thousands of silver machines remained perfectly still, surrounding damaged equipment without touching another system. So every war may have started with a misunderstanding, Daniel finished. Another historian rushed into the chamber carrying newly decoded records recovered from an abandoned archive world. "Admiral, we finally translated one of the oldest maintenance directives." Kaler nodded. "Read it." The historian swallowed before speaking. "Emergency restoration protocol. If supervising personnel cannot be located, preserve critical infrastructure until authorized maintenance staff arrive." The words echoed across the chamber. Daniel quietly smiled. Not because he had been proven right, but because the missing piece had finally appeared. "They never came to conquer anyone," he said. "They came because nobody else was taking care of the network anymore." Emma frowned. "Then why were planets abandoned afterward?" Daniel pointed toward another report. "Look closer. Most evacuations happened after governments shut down power grids, destroyed transportation hubs, and disabled orbital facilities trying to stop the machines. Once the infrastructure collapsed, people left on their own." Kaler stared at centuries of military doctrine with a completely different expression. Every strategy had been built on a false assumption. Every fleet had fought an enemy that never understood why it was being attacked. Suddenly, the refinery commander interrupted again. "Admiral," the command prompt changed. Everyone turned toward the live feed. The old terminal displayed a new message. "Supervisor identity partially verified. Legacy engineering standards detected. Awaiting final confirmation." Daniel's eyebrows lifted. "Partially verified?" Emma looked at him. "What does that mean?" "Somehow it recognizes the engineering protocols Earth still teaches." "But not completely?" Daniel slowly shook his head. "No, it is looking for something older." He reached toward the communication console. "Open a direct channel to that terminal." Kaler hesitated for only a second before nodding. "Do it." The connection opened. The blinking cursor waited. Daniel rested his fingers above the keyboard without pressing a single key. "If I answer this prompt," he said quietly, "we are about to learn whether humanity inherited old engineering traditions or whether someone taught them to us in the first place." Daniel rested his fingers on the old keyboard for several long seconds before pressing a single key. He did not enter a password. He did not try to bypass the system. Instead, he typed one simple command that every junior maintenance technician on Earth had learned during their first week on the job. "Request diagnostic summary." The blinking cursor disappeared. Nothing happened. Then every silver machine inside the refinery stopped moving at exactly the same moment. Across the council chamber, dozens of delegates held their breath. The terminal answered with a soft chime. "Supervisor protocol accepted. Diagnostic report compiling." Daniel slowly leaned back in his chair. Emma looked at him in disbelief. That actually worked. Daniel smiled for the first time all day. It was never looking for a secret code. It was looking for someone who asked the right question. A flood of engineering reports filled every display in the chamber. Thousands of maintenance records stretched back farther than any civilization had existed. Inspection logs, repair schedules, structural upgrades, emergency stabilization reports. Every entry described planets, stations, shipyards, and transportation networks with the same calm, practical language. There was not a single reference to conquest, invasion, or military objectives. Admiral Kaler quietly read one report after another before lowering his head. "We spent centuries preparing for a war." Daniel nodded gently. "While they spent those same centuries trying to keep the lights on." The refinery commander suddenly interrupted over the communication channel. Admiral, every trapped worker has been safely released. Environmental systems are fully restored. Power efficiency has increased by 31%. The machines are leaving. Everyone turned toward the live feed. Countless silver units lifted away from the refinery in perfect silence. They did not celebrate. They did not acknowledge anyone watching them. Their work was finished, so they simply moved on to the next aging station waiting somewhere among the stars. Emma watched until the final machine disappeared into the darkness. They never wanted recognition. Most maintenance crews do not, Daniel replied with a quiet laugh. Kaler slowly walked across the chamber until he stood beside Daniel. The proud military commander who had spent his entire career studying the greatest threat in the galaxy extended his hand. Engineer Brooks, today you saved more than this refinery. Daniel shook his hand. No, Admiral. I think today we finally stopped making the same mistake. Kaler looked around the silent council. From this moment forward, every military engagement order against these machines is suspended until direct communication has been attempted. No delegate objected. Not one. The oldest fear in the galaxy had disappeared without a single battle. As the meeting finally came to an end, Emma and Daniel walked together through the quiet corridor outside the chamber. A small cleaning robot rolled past their feet, bumped gently into a wall, turned itself around, and continued on its way. Emma smiled. You really were thinking about one of those when this all started, were not you? Daniel watched the little machine disappear around the corner. People usually notice technology only after it breaks. And before today, Emma asked. He looked through the station window, toward the stars where the silver machines had already vanished. The galaxy looked at maintenance crews and imagined monsters because nobody remembered what quiet work looks like. Emma nodded thoughtfully. That is a lesson bigger than engineering. Daniel smiled. Most important lessons are. Years later, history books would not remember the day humanity defeated an unstoppable machine swarm, because that was never what happened. They remembered the day an entire galaxy discovered that fear can survive for thousands of years, but sometimes all it takes to end it is one ordinary person willing to ask a simple question before reaching for the panic button.